Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to call the April 28th Big Cypress Basin Board meeting to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
The Republic, which is stands with liberty and justice for all.
It's great to see everyone this morning. As a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible via Zoom, as well as Collier TV and the district's website. Board members, today we won't be using our buttons, so if you would like the opportunity to speak, please just get my attention or speak if you hear that it's quiet, and you can just jump right in. For those here in person, if you would like to comment on the agenda item, please complete a speaker card in the lobby and bring it up front to Mr. Troy Miller. If you're joining us by Zoom, use the raise the hand feature and Troy will call on you. And if you're participating via phone, *9 raises your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes. I know we've had some rain lately, but historically, April has been one of the driest months of the year. As such, it has been Water Conservation Month. Heading into rainy season, as our lawns flourish and canals fill, it's easy to leave thoughts of the drier months behind. However, conserving water year-round is an integral part of managing and protecting Southwest Florida's water supplies today and in the future. It's certainly one of the most essential functions here at the Basin. April, in fact, is a month chock full of environmental appreciation as we celebrate Earth Day as well. I hope everyone got a chance to get out and enjoy some of the many fabulous activities and programs around town this past weekend for Earth Day. I know I did. But for those of us fortunate enough to live here on the Paradise Coast, we know there is no one day to celebrate Mother Nature or appreciate all that she provides. We must strive always to do our best by her. With that, the next item is agenda revisions. Ms. Keeler?
You have no agenda revisions today.
Okay, thank you very much. Abstentions by board members for items on the agenda. Vice Chair Waters?
None for me, ma'am.
Mr. Hill?
None for me.
And I do not have any. That'll move us into the approval of the minutes for the February 24th, 2023 Big Cypress Basin Board meeting. If there are any changes, now's the time to make those changes to the minutes. If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve.
Vice Chair Water makes the motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Hill is the second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. That brings us to the Basin Administrator's report. Ms. Keeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, board members. It is a pleasure to present your strategic plan to you today. It is your next 5-year plan from 2023 to 2028. And before I give you a high-level overview, I really want to thank you guys for your time in reviewing it, your suggestions and changes. With the changes that you all suggested, I think we've got a really good plan moving us forward into our next 5 years. So let's start. I get asked kind of often, what is a strategic plan? Why do we have it? And the short answer is it really provides you the guidance for your policy and budget decisions over your next 5 years. In your plan, you have success indicators, strategic projects that are going to guide us over those next 5 years. Some of the topics that are in your plan that we're going to look at for projects include resiliency, water supply, flood control, public engagement, and administration of the basin. And you're going to see some projects, or I know you've seen them and the public will see them. It's going to be posted on our website later today. And we've also sent it out to some of our key partners that we work with. So what everyone sees in this plan are projects that we want to tackle over the next 5 years that are going to be in your future budgets. It sets a new 5-year capital improvement plan with about 20 projects listed in there on maps, from new structures, because some of them are aged out. Some of them we want to provide better flood control. We have canal improvement projects that are listed in there. For resiliency, we talk about that a lot, and especially after Hurricane Ian, the importance of having access to our structures and gates right up to onslaught of the storm, where today we have to what we call lock out and tag out the structures maybe many, many hours before a storm. So with some hardening of our facilities and more robust remote operations, that will help us respond to the system for whatever that storm is bringing into us right up until onslaught, as well as having access and communications immediately following a storm. When we look back at, say, Hurricane Irma and then Ian just recently, it could be days before communications are back up for the area and we have control of our structures. So by hardening our structures as well as building our new tower, that will improve our ability to provide better flood control for this community over the next 5 years. Some other examples that you're going to see in the plan include restoration work restoration work in the Bird Rookery and Corkscrew Swamp areas. We're looking to reestablish that historic hydro period for those areas, and that's going to be a plan that we're going to tackle over the next 5 years. And probably the last thing that I want to highlight in your plan is it sets the standard for maintenance of our canal system, as well as exotic removal or controls in our natural areas. And one of the examples that is in the plan for canal maintenance is how do we move forward from using traditional sod? The plan calls for us to look at alternatives so that we can reduce those long-term mowing costs, get a low-growing plant in there that we don't have to maintain as often, but also it starts helping us get towards better water quality because we're not having those grass clippings going into the canal. So it's a really good project, an item that's in your strategic plan for the next 5 years. As you all know, we currently have a pilot study going on with Naples Botanical Gardens on that very item. It's going very well. They're partnering with FGCU Water School and Collier County for the location. This is taking place at Freedom Park. And it should be wrapping up the end of this fiscal year, early next fiscal year. And so I think that we are well situated for your strategic plan to move that forward as a strategic priority for you. So that's just a quick overview. And Madam Chair, I'll bring it back to you if you have any questions or comments for me.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Board members, any questions for Lisa?
Covered it already.
I'd like to just highlight what an amazing job you and the entire team and the district team did on this strategic plan. This is what it looks like. I would offer this to the public as a document that's worth reading. And if you don't read it as efficiently or capture everything when you're reading on a computer, print it out. It's highlights our region so well with all of the beautiful photos of not only the nature, but our flood control system, our water supply. Even Hurricane Ian made it into the report. So this has been a great effort, and it takes a whole village to pull something like this together. Not only water supply folks, field station folks, resiliency folks, Basin folks, but the communications team also to review everything and to put it all together. So I'm very proud of this effort because you all did just heroes work here in pulling this together, and it's a document we can be proud of. Plus, with the board members' comments on this report, I know that you read it and you really tried to make it the best strategic plan in a living document, which is something I think that's very important. So thank you very much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
And everyone else who contributed to that.
Madam Chair, I do
Yes.
have one registered public speaker for this item.
Okay,
Your registered speaker is Brad Cornell.
thank you. Yes, come on up and speak on the administrator's report there, Brad.
Thanks. I wanted to address the strategic plan. And I'm Brad Cornell. Excuse me. I'm here on behalf of Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida, and its Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. So my congratulations also to you and staff for bringing forward this strategic plan. It's got many really positive features and important goals to achieve that are going to be in all of our interests. So I wanted to flag a couple of those myself, and then I have one suggestion. On the positive side, we're really happy to see the water quality work highlighted for Picayune Strand, really critical issue as that project is starting to come to its conclusion. And as Lisa had pointed out, the crew and Corkscrew sanctuary restoration and collaboration on that hydrology is an absolute critical part of our shared mission for not only habitat, but the water resources that we jointly address and manage. And the resiliency issue is a really important point that I want to highlight. It's as the district and the basin and the local governments in the state of Florida are all coming up with strategies to increase our resilience against the negative effects of climate change and tropical storms like Ian and Irma. Sometimes it's forgotten that the integrity of our watersheds inland, the wetlands, and the health of our whole system that is at the top of the watershed contributes to resilience to the coastal communities, both natural and human communities. And that's not always apparent. And it's apparent, we believe, when you look at the 300-acre wildfire that just happened near Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and Bird Rookery Swamp that burned up several buildings and vehicles and threatened people's lives. These kinds of catastrophic wildfires are the opposite sides of the coin from flood protection. And we need to be really cognizant of addressing those kinds of threats that are part of that. And the last thing sort of related to this is water conservation. The water supply plan identifies water conservation, and you have that in your strategic plan. One thing that's left out is converting grass and turf to native plants. In fact, it was just mentioned about your canal banks. Mm-hmm. We should be doing that, and you all are in a great position as water managers to lead that charge, to let the public know that this is an important strategy that will help us really improve our water conservation numbers. We've plateaued, and the reason is irrigation for grass. And there's all kinds of reasons that you already know that we need to convert as much of that grass to native plants as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, for your comments. Appreciate it. Is there any other comments?
That was our only registered speaker for item number 6.
Okay, thank you, Troy. I appreciate it. That brings us to general public comment. We have 2 opportunities for the public to speak at our meeting. This is the first section for you to speak, and the other one is closer to the end of the meeting. So are there any public comment speakers?
Madam Chair, I have one registered speaker here in the room. I'm monitoring Zoom and no one has their hand up at this point. Your speaker here in the room is Dan Truckee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Dan Truckee. I'm here to represent Port of the Islands Community Improvement District. We are in the middle of the Everglades Restoration Project. And when you would look at the whole project, we lie just right off Highway 41. I'm not sure if you're familiar. But,
I've been there several times, so I am familiar with what you're
thank
talking
you.
about.
We have a problem with the Everglades Restoration Project and the impacts that it's created for us at Port of the Islands. Right before Hurricane Ian, we had flooded out on our well road. So we are a community that has a wastewater and water treatment facility, and our wells that supply that facility, our raw water comes from 3 Everglade wells that are approximately 2 miles into the Everglades from our facility. And because of the sheet flow, with the project, they had filled the Prairie Canal in years ago. And over the last few years, we have seen more and more sheet water coming through, and we were flooded prior to Hurricane Ian. There was a rain event that was a few days ahead of the hurricane, and the water came over the top of the well road, flooded it out. And then with the hurricane came the winds, took down all the power for our well fields. We were out approximately 20-something days of power on the well fields. We were out 14 days at the facility, and our community was out 5 days without power. We had to run equipment back there during the storm to keep the raw water to supply our 3,500 people in our community with water and sewer during that time. Because of the floods, bringing equipment back there was a problem. The flood washed out some of the culverts that are in our road. Our main line that runs from the wellhead supplying the raw water runs just underneath those culverts. And then with that being soft and underwater due to the sheet flow, we brought in heavy equipment and it broke up our pipe, it broke up the road. We have a lot of costs and are going through a lot of repairs to repair that. So we are in the millions of dollars in repair to fix that. And we have come to you to talk about that sheet flow and what it's caused. Now, we've been trying to get some meetings. We do have a meeting coming up on Thursday with Steve Basin and the Corps engineers. And I believe that you're going to be there also.
Yes, I am. That's what I was going to mention, that I look forward to that discussion next week. And I think all of the representatives are going to be there. We've got everybody plugged in so that we can discuss this topic in further detail.
Okay, excellent. So that's all I really had for you today, is I wanted to bring it to your attention and know that we're going to be there to talk about the issue that we have on hand right now.
Thank you. I look forward to getting into more of the details with you in that day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that was our only registered speaker in the room, and no one has their hand raised on Zoom at this point.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And that'll take us to the first first presentation on our agenda: copper TMDLs for Naples Bay, Rock Creek, Haldeman Creek, and Clam Bay. And we have joining us remotely Ansel Bubel from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and he's going to make the presentation to us. Go ahead, Ansel.
Good morning. Logistically, are you all going to share the slides, or should I share it on mine? Okay, there we go. Slides are here. Perfect. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Ansel Bubel, and I'm the manager of the TMDL section at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. This morning, we're going to talk about several TMDLs that we have drafted for marine waters in the Naples Bay and surrounding areas. We have the specific water bodies that we are addressing include Naples Bay, which is WIBID 3278R4, Haldeman Creek, Rock Creek, and then Clam Bay, which is a little bit north of there. And there's a variety of Class 2 and Class 3 marine criteria that apply. Class 2 waters are shellfish harvesting waters, and Class 3 waters are waters that are the water quality standards are set for protection of human uses and protection of a balanced fish and wildlife community. And so there's two groupings of these waters. The first grouping is in Naples Bay and some of the surrounding tributaries. So that includes Naples Bay, Rock Creek, and Haldeman Creek. And the other slightly disjointed water body, if you go to the next slide, is Clam Bay, which is a little bit north of Naples Bay. To contrast these two basins, Naples Bay has a watershed that extends a good bit inland, whereas Clam Bay is a very small watershed that's just some direct drainage. And so these are slightly different systems. Next slide. So across the state of Florida, there's a marine copper criterion set at 3.7 micrograms per liter. And that criteria is set never to be exceeded. That criteria was set primarily to protect marine life including shellfish, finfish, and other species. And so copper can have some negative effects. It's obviously used actually as a sanitizer in human applications. And so when it appears in a dissolved form in the marine environment, it can both be acutely toxic, particularly to benthic life, but it can also bind to the gills of finfish. And so these criteria are set to protect all of these various ecological communities that are so vital to our state here in Florida. Next slide. So when we look at the available data for these 4 water bodies, starting with Naples Bay and Rock Creek, we can see we have a graph, and on the x-axis we have years from about the year 2000 to 2020, and on the y-axis we have copper concentration in micrograms per liter. The horizontal red line is the copper criterion at 3.7 micrograms per liter. And so you can see for these 2 water bodies that we have a significant amount of the data exceeding that criteria, sometimes exceeding it by significant proportions. For Naples Bay, sometimes it's 8 times or so higher at its worst, and for Rock Creek, it's frequently up to about twice as high as the criteria. We'll go to next slide. We can discuss the next 2 waters. So Haldeman Creek, again, sees significant concentrations above the criteria. And then Clam Bay has some extremely high numbers. They're not super frequent, but some of these numbers are up to almost 100 times the criteria. So at least from the concentration perspective, the problem looks a little more acute in Clam Bay, but all 4 of these water segments are exceeding the available the criterion, and we believe need restoration efforts to fix this problem. Next slide. And so when we developed this TMDL, these are details that were discussed. So we had a public workshop on this TMDL back on August 12th of 2012. But when we actually set the TMDL, we did an outlier removal, statistical outlier removal, just because some of this data appeared to be rather significant outliers. So we used an outlier removal approach, but even when you do that, you still see significant exceedances of the criteria. And the outlier approach was just applied to Clam Bay. Well, the statistical approach was applied to all water bodies, but only Clam Bay was found to have data that were statistical outliers. And then this was used, and I'll describe in subsequent slides, the actual derivation of the TMDL. Next slide. So we're seeing in the data that we have problems with copper, but there's other signs of the issue that we have. And the most visually alarming sign is that some of the oysters, when you look at oysters in the bay, have that color, that teal color. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's copper colored oysters. So blue oysters are a pretty alarming sign, and I've never really heard of this occurring anywhere else. So this is definitely a concern. And the next step would be exploring why we might have this issue. So a lot of times when we're developing TMDLs, we're working on nutrients, and nutrients come from almost every human land use adds some amount of nutrients above, at an elevated rate. But copper is a little bit different because most human land uses are not contributing. So there's a select grouping of sort of activities that we undertake that we think are going to play a role here. So one of them that's likely to be a major contributor here are copper-based algicides, and these are typically applied to stormwater ponds when there is an algal bloom and there's an attempt to control it. Additionally, boats that are left in saltwater always have an anti-fouling paint, and usually that's basically a copper-based paint that's toxic to crusting organisms. And so the slow leaching of that paint, which is sort of how it's designed to work, may be contributing some copper. And then finally, for agricultural and for landscape purposes, sometimes copper is applied as a fungicide. So these are the three sources across the state we think that might be contributing. However, in these watersheds, when you look at it, there's very little agriculture, and the concentrations appear worse. Like you don't see a signal where you see agricultural lands in the headwaters and you can trace a contribution path down. The data appears worse in the marine waters and some of these tributaries where we're doing TMDLs. So that would leave the primary sources to be potentially boats or algicides. But if you look, and the contribution for boats is definitely not zero, but if you look at marinas and you look at proximity to large amounts of moored boats, you don't see hotspots around there. So we don't think we think that that's part of it. But the copper-based algicides are likely to be one of the main contributors here. And so that's going to be an area where we're going to focus on our restoration efforts. So the actual TMDL is a restoration target. We set a % reduction. And so we used the applicable marine criteria, and we did a % reduction to that number from our calculated data with the outliers removed. And again, they were just removed from Clam Bay. And then our TMDL, you go to the next slide. The TMDLs are set to achieve the applicable copper criteria. And we have these % reductions, and they range from 47 to 68% reduction. But the real, and what I'm going to jump into in the next couple slides here is that the pathways by which we would get to restoration are a little bit different for copper. And so we're going to jump into that because that's in some ways, that's the most important part of this presentation is getting the information out about how interested stakeholders and folks in state and local governments can all work together to try to solve this issue. So if you jump to the next slide. So for the TMDL itself, we are, just as an FYI, we are going to be moving towards finalizing that. TMDLs are adopted into state rule and then approved by EPA. So we're going to move forward with that rulemaking process this year. But in parallel, we're also working on restoration. So if you jump to the next slide, we've been, over the last 6 months, we've been coordinating with agencies across the state, including Collier County, City of Naples, obviously the South Florida Water Management District. And this meeting is one of the results of those productive discussions we've held. We've also been in discussions with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and EPA. And we're trying to look across these agencies to see how we can find solutions given the sort of non-traditional nature of these copper-based problems. And so in particular, we think there's two sort of nexus of ways that we can actually fix this problem. So the first is that we believe that the use of copper-based algicides is a significant stressor here, but there are actually alternative products that can be used. Some of them are peroxide-based, like an oxidizer that would remove algae that way rather than using copper. And some of those alternatives, that once they had treated the water body, would not contribute to downstream waters, and they would be much more environmentally benign. So if folks are on HOA boards, we would strongly encourage anybody in a decision-making framework there to push for stormwater ponds to be managed first with non-copper treatments, and also to consider looking at nutrient management, which is ultimately driving some of the algal blooms that are then being treated in a more using the copper-based algicides. The second consideration we're looking at is if we have any permitted facilities and we find, looking at the data, that we can tie it back to a facility with a permit, we're looking at what our options are for regulatory options for that if that hypothetically appears in the future. And again, to recap, we are working at this in the agency perspective, but individual concerned citizens can have a significant impact here. I know I was on an HOA board a couple years ago, and I was able to influence the decision making. This was here in Tallahassee, but if you are on an HOA board, you have the ability to make a significant impact here. And if you want to reach out to any of the agencies listed here, I know we would all be happy to help guide you. If this is something you are interested in, we want to help you do the right thing and push for the environmentally beneficial solution here. So thank you all. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to clarify any points or go into anything else. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'm sure there are some questions. I have a few. We'll go to the board first if you have some questions. You want to go ahead first, Dan? Go ahead.
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Ansel. Question is, once the TMDL gets adopted, as you explained, there's going to be a lot of public outreach and try and get folks to, better manage anything they're applying and reduce the load to the water bodies. Who's the point agency on that? Does that fall back to Collier County as the operator of the MS4? Is that DEP? Is it the district? Just who's going to be responsible for that? And then the second question is, as part of the TMDL that gets adopted, do we start to do additional testing to try and pinpoint where these sources are from? Because when you see some of the numbers, particularly in Clam Bay, that are that are as high as they are, that would seem to indicate that I'd have to think that's somebody spraying a lake or something like that. That's just discharging right over a weir and going downstream.
Thank you. Those are both two good questions. So when a TMDL is adopted, the TMDL is implemented typically through permitting actions through other entities that have a discharge, have an effluent limit. So like if you had the most straightforward example is if you had like a point source, either an industrial or a domestic wastewater facility, and you could trace it back there, they would clearly have a permit limit and you could address it in their permit limit. You could also find that a entity like a that is a stormwater permit, we might find if we collect more data, to your second point, we absolutely do need more data on this. We might find that some facilities are putting out copper at problematic concentrations, and then that would have to be dealt with through a permit compliance action there. And then if the problem we found were coming from something like marinas, there I don't think there's a direct regulatory action, but there's a clean marina program, and so we can, in a more proactive sense, we can do outreach. We can do outreach to those folks. So there's going to be a different set of solutions depending on the sources we find, and different agencies have different regulatory roles. So if it was hypothetically, if we were talking about an agricultural source, that would be Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services that would be the point agency. If we were talking about a domestic wastewater facility or an industrial wastewater facility, that would probably be DEP as a point agency. And if we were talking about an entity with a stormwater permit, that would be either DEP or the district, depending on kind of how that's still to be sort of worked out. But there would be different point agencies for different types of sources, I guess is the short answer. And to your second question,
Okay.
we absolutely do need more data. I think we look forward to having some more discussions about implementation, and I think Clam Bay is maybe the simpler case there because there's a smaller watershed, and it's more likely that we'll be able to tie that to a specific contributing source.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so it sounds like to me that the department stays involved even once the TMDL is developed to keep an eye on it and manage that process and assist whatever agency is based on the source with trying to get it remediated.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. We're trying to stay involved in this, given the sort of non-traditional, given that this differs from other pollutants, and so we're trying to help convene that restoration pathway, even if it goes through other coordinating agencies. We're trying to stay involved so we can ensure that we get to success on this issue. Because the good news is that copper is coming from a limited number of sources, and there's alternative products. So, like conversely to nutrients, actually, there is a pathway to fix this relatively quickly if we can identify the sources and to make a strategic change in treatment approaches.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. And then last question I would have is, I assume if you switch to peroxide or something like that, it's that's a safer alternative. It's not, we're going to push down the copper problem and something else pops up. If it's peroxide's not going to lead to a problem that might be different, I would presume. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's and I think that's part of the coordination we're having with FDACS is about what alternatives might exist out there. I don't have a specific product to recommend. That's not my role, but I will say there are a variety of, they have told us that there are a variety of non-copper treatment options, and evaluating those would be to find the most beneficial, to find the product that achieves the goal with the least other harms would be probably the best approach.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
And so I've got a number of questions. First, you were kind of touching on it, but what's the communication strategy to discuss the situation with the appropriate people? Like Pelican Bay, obviously there's a homeowners association. Is there any form of communication with them about this issue?
We have not gotten to the point of approaching individual permittees about this approach, but I believe that Collier County and the city of Naples have been deeply involved with this issue for at least a decade, and they've been attempting to fix this issue on their own for a while. And now I think that the point we're at is we've got a lot of other folks who are willing to sort of come up shoulder to shoulder with them, and I think they may have attempted to have a discussion, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I think but I think going forward, that will absolutely be a key part of TMDL implementation.
Okay. All right. And then in Naples Bay, there's certainly I think with proper awareness of the issue. And one of the things that I was wondering about, and I should ask my wife, who's a physician, what's the threat to one's health from ingesting copper? I would think you probably put on weight. Isn't that a metal?
Yeah, it's a metal. There are definitely drinking water standards for copper, which I believe are significantly higher than the marine aquatic life standards. I think that the problem we are seeing falls in the greatest impact would be to aquatic life, but I don't know that we've necessarily, like, I think there's some open-ended questions. Like, if somebody started eating the oysters in Naples Bay, could there be a health effect of that? I think that's a possibility. I'm not a physician, so I don't want to pretend to know the answer to that.
Okay.
But
I think that's on the communication side. You got to get somebody's attention. If they're going to die from eating a redfish from Naples Bay, I think that would get their attention, and it would also get our attention, since we have some responsibility over this. So, and then the last thing I was wondering about is that you highlight areas of concern, which, by the way, not a surprise, but there's a lot of other areas I'm concerned about, specifically in two ways. One is, I was wondering if there's areas that show very low copper contamination in the water, which would be, and I guess I would look to use them as like your control area where you can say, okay, over in this area, it's perfect. It's showing very low levels. So then we could decide that, yes, that this area, Naples Bay, Clam Bay are affected by some human activity. And the other thing I was going to ask is if you also study the Chokoloskee Bay near Everglades City area, because my concern there is from a community health standpoint, we have a broken sewage system. Combine that with crabbing going on. So crabbers are commercial crabbers are selling crabs from that exact area, which there's plenty of green muck around the beach area on Chokoloskee Island. So I'm quite concerned about that. And I don't know if that's a part of your study areas that just wasn't part of your conversation today.
Sure, that's a good question. This TMDL was aimed at water bodies where we had a known copper issue, but that's an interesting, what you raised two other interesting points. And I think I'd be happy to have a follow-up discussion on both of those, because I know there's other folks from DEP that I'd want to have, because it sounds like there's other analytes other than copper around Chokoloskee. So if that's I'm happy to have that as a follow-up item that we can set up a meeting
We can do that offline.
Perfect.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I also shared your concern, Andy, with that criteria, how it was set, what was based on. You have the number 3.7, never to be exceeded. You talked about that may be specific to aquatic life versus human life. How would you describe that criterion in layman's terms, Ansel? Can you do it in a brief way to help understand what that 3.7 means?
Sure. So in the grand scheme of things, 3.7 micrograms per liter is a very low concentration, but copper as an element is toxic to a lot of living things. And it has known negative effects particularly to fish and oysters. And there's copper concentrations are so far above it that you're seeing significant negative impacts, most notably the blue oysters. That's a very troubling physical manifestation of the problem.
So if I would eat those blue oysters, the ones that are impacted by copper, would I get sick?
That's a very good question. I would have to check with EPA about the human health consumption, like figure out the amount of copper you get per oyster, the amount of the dosing. That would be an interesting follow-up for us to consider. But I think that's a very important question that I can look into.
And certainly you can come back to the board and just plug in and answer some of these questions. You're welcome to do that. The other question that I have is, let me see, I have a couple here. Is copper concentrations, I guess maybe I'll rephrase it. Are copper concentrations different in Southwest Florida? When you're looking at copper concentrations, are you finding that that's one of the things that stands out when you look at water in Southwest Florida?
That's an excellent question. So when we looked across the state, we had approximately 40 or 50 waters that exceeded the copper criteria. But if you just looked at magnitude, these 4 waters that we've chosen today had the highest magnitude of copper concentrations across the state. This is the worst of the worst in terms of copper impairments across the state. So this choice to start here was not random. These are literally the highest concentrations you'll find across the state of Florida.
Well, that's a sobering statement that you just made. that Southwest Florida, these four areas that we're talking about right now are the highest in the state. And that is concerning for sure, especially if it's affecting the marine life. And we have such an active, fishing and oyster and all of that type of community. So we'll definitely want to have you come back and talk about that a little further. The other thing is that in your comments, you mentioned homeowners associations, and I sometimes think that homeowners associations don't necessarily consider themselves on the water quality team, but homeowners associations are so important to water quality, and it almost begins there in the whole process of the water that we have on our planet, because it's a finite amount of water. It's the same water. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly that they're so important in terms of bringing them on board with the team for water quality. I've been in Collier County 21 years, and I've heard the conversation about homeowners associations and stormwater ponds probably for a good 18 of those years. So this is not a new topic. It just becomes, I think, more critical because of what you're seeing in terms of copper in these natural bodies and also going forward. How do you want to focus on restoration? You mentioned the term focus on restoration. How do you see that happening? What does that look like?
So I think starting with conversations like this are a critical part, because I think although the issue's been known, I think we need to make sure that folks who are in a decision-making capacity, particularly in HOAs, and even somebody who's repainting the bottom of their boat, there are best management practices for both of those kinds of things. And if we can make folks aware of how they can make small actions that will have large positive that can changes to the bay, I think there's a lot that individual citizens can do here. And so I think for restoration, we're trying to bring everybody together and kind of talk through what some concrete steps are. Previously, I think Collier County and City of Naples have tried to do this on their own, and we're hoping that by bringing all of the agencies and bringing people in, that we can help them fix this problem that they've been trying to fix on their own for a while. So hopefully by convening the right group of people, we can figure out a solution.
Well, that's very, very encouraging, and certainly I think that it's important that we do work together. I have one question on the Clean Marina program. I'm familiar with that program. I don't know if you oversee it or if another division at DEP does, but how many clean marinas do we have signed up, or how many marinas do we have here in this area? And how many are signed up to be a part of the Clean Marina program? If a
That's an
percentage
excellent
would
question.
be fun.
I do not manage that section, but other folks at DEP do. I believe
Okay.
that some of the marinas in this area are. I would have to do a check for the proportion. So I'll have to get back to you on that detail. But some of the marinas are, I believe, are signed up. So and I think the rate was something like 30 to 50% of the marinas were signed up. That's off the top of my head, but I think that it is a well accepted program, and many of the marinas in the area are a part of it. It is a voluntary program, as I understand it. It's not a regulatory thing. It's a voluntary set of best practices that marinas can follow for a variety of not just bottom paint, also dealing with waste and water and sanitation and things like that.
Yes, I understood it as a voluntary program when it was presented at a forum that I was at. That would be helpful. I know it's not your division, but that would be helpful if you could share that back with us. And I think that goes back to the communication strategy that Mr. Hill was bringing up, and how do we get everybody on board, and how do we get the word out and all of that. And I'm hoping that maybe we can advance this with some new ideas, and maybe partner with you on maybe a pilot study here in not a pilot study, but a pilot project here in Collier County to see what we can do. It's definitely, if you're telling this board today and the citizens that are listening that Southwest Florida, those 4 waterways or those water bodies or watersheds that you highlighted for us today are the top in the state for copper, we've got an issue that we need to take on and to address. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your presentation, but it is a sobering thing. Is there any public comment, Troy?
Yes, ma'am. We have one registered speaker here in the room, Brad Cornell, and I am monitoring for raised hands on Zoom.
Thank you, Brad Cornell, on behalf of Audubon. Madam Chair, so I just wanted to flag one comment that Ansel Bobel had made, but wasn't in his slides. He mentioned nutrients and nutrient inputs as one of the factors in this. And when you look at Clam Bay, where these highest numbers are, it's not a boat system. It's not a navigation system. There aren't any marinas on that. There's some canoes and kayaks, but that's not where that's coming from. It's coming from the algicide, which I think he said. And so it's important to look at alternatives to copper, but it's probably even more important, and you all as water managers can help facilitate this, but it's more important to work with the surrounding property owners and local governments and districts to limit fertilizer and nutrient inputs. And that gets back to the grass thing I mentioned earlier, but it's hard to get away from the negative impact of fertilizing grass next to water. And, algae blooms, everyone has said that if over a decade we've worked on this problem in Clam Bay and we haven't achieved any success, I think there's a persistent problem of nutrient input. That's the source. So if I can suggest we all collaborate on that, that would be a good outcome, I think.
Thank you, Brad.
We have I do have a hands raised. Excuse me, online. Ashley Jenkins. Ashley, you should be prompted to unmute yourself. I'm waiting for that. All right. Mark, we're trying to get, okay, Ashley, you're being prompted to unmute yourself. Watching. And she's still muted at this point. Ashley, if you're on the phone, I think it's, what is it? Is it *9 to unmute? Yeah. Okay. Well, she's still not unmuted. It's *6 to unmute if you're on a phone, Ashley. If not, you should be prompted to unmute your computer or laptop. All right. Her hand has come down and she's not unmuting, so I'll suggest we move on at this point.
All right. Thank you very much. So there's no further public comment?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. Good discussion, and we'll move on to the next item that kind of dovetails nicely with this one that we just had, and it's the district water quality monitoring overview. And we have Christina Gautier with the district water quality monitoring with South Florida Water Management District. Welcome.
Hello. Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members, members of the public. First and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be presenting here today. My name is Christina Gauthier. I am an engineering supervisor at the Compliance Assessment and Reporting section of the Water Quality Bureau at the district. Joining me today is the Water Quality Bureau Chief, Stuart Van Horn. He's in the audience with us today, and he may help answer questions following my presentation as well. And with that, I'm here to talk to you today about the district's overall water quality monitoring with focus on the Southwest Florida estuarine areas. And the objectives of my presentation today is to give an overview of monitoring across the district boundaries, including Big Cypress Basin, and discuss the purpose of why we monitor, not only in Big Cypress Basin, but overall. We will identify estuarine stations used for this presentation and for the data that we'll be presenting today, and the estuarine numeric nutrient regions in which these stations are located. We provide a summary of water quality parameters for 12 estuarine regions, grouped by regions. And I'll be comparing regional water quality from the data from the district stations with estuarine numeric nutrient criteria as established by the FDEP. So let's start a little bit with the water quality monitoring drivers for the district. So there's 4 main drivers for water quality monitoring within the district. The first being restoration efforts. These are projects such as the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, which I believe many of you know and has been mentioned before, where the district monitors prior to the development of these restoration efforts to obtain baseline conditions of the water bodies and better understand how to design these restoration projects so that they appropriately are maintained and improve the water quality of the region. The district also performs water quality monitoring in support of water quality compliance, such as TMDL development, that's total maximum daily load development by FDEP, and other water quality standard development like numeric nutrient criteria. I will be explaining a little bit more about numeric nutrient criteria down the road in this presentation. We also monitor for permit compliance. So once a restoration effort or any other project by the district, like stormwater treatment areas, for example, are established, some of them are permitted or they are permitted. And once this permit is issued, we need to monitor that the water quality standards are being maintained. Another monitoring driver is Basin Management Action Plan implementation. And along with counties and cities, the district monitors and the data helps instruct and keep track of the progress of water quality within that BMAP region. We monitor for consent decrees, such as the Everglades Settlement Agreement, where there's requirements to monitor quantity and quality of water being delivered to the Everglades, source control as well. Another monitoring driver is to support project operations and maintenance. We want to make sure that our projects are operating and being maintained adequately. And finally, in support of water supply plans. So one example is the district performs regional groundwater monitoring. So we know the saltwater intrusion line and better understand this factor where the saltwater intrusion line is located and better understand water supply needs into the future and how to better organize those. Focusing in a little bit more on apologies for that. The district-wide monitoring that we have 894 surface water stations. Some of the areas that we monitor require more frequent sampling, such as daily sampling. And for those, we have auto samplers. We have 98 auto samplers. In our boundaries, we count with 47 continuous monitoring sites. These are sites that continuously monitor for physical parameters such as pH, dissolved oxygen, specific conductivity, and they monitor anywhere from as frequent as 15 minutes to 30 minutes. So they're continuously monitoring that data. And we count with 114 groundwater wells, 48 sediment sampling stations, and 48 fish sampling locations. The district counts with a lab in the Fields Operations Center, but there's collaboration with FDEP for particular tests that we may not be able to perform. And the FDEP is one of the biggest data users that the district has. They employ our data to develop water quality criteria, such as the numeric nutrient criteria we'll be talking about, and to also perform impaired water evaluations with our data. The monitoring here shown on the map is not necessarily the extent of what we monitor. We partner with NGOs, research institutions, and other government agencies. We partner with USGS in groundwater sampling efforts, or the Corps of Engineers as well. And they have monitoring stations that we collaborate with them as well. So this is what is the district's domain, right? And so we may have some more even collaborations that we are not shown in this map. So here in the pictures, we see 2 district employees collecting a water sample, a surface water grab sample. In the middle here, we see district employees deploying a continuous monitoring site. And then we see in the right corner there, a district employee analyzing a water quality data. And now focusing in, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit before, and now focusing in a little bit on the Big Cypress water quality monitoring. So for this boundary, we have 59 surface water grab stations, 4 continuous surface water sites, and 33 groundwater wells. And the district uses this data to identify trends along the coast and to determine influence of freshwater inflows from upstream as well, and from the watersheds upstream as well. And with the data that the district gathers, we track groundwater salinity levels also to determine saltwater intrusion. And we use data to provide insights on the nutrient levels and the seasonality or certain patterns that the nutrients display in the region. And we assess the progress of restoration projects using this data. Now, the district is not the only agency that monitors in the Big Cypress Basin. Here's an example of 4. We have the City of Naples, Marco Island, Collier County Pollution Control, and Rookery Bay Research Reserve. There's other agencies and organizations that sample in this area and monitor water quality. We try to avoid duplication in sampling efforts. In many instances, these organizations send their data to FDEP, and this data is made publicly available via the Watershed Information Network, or WIN. So, and they may be doing water quality sampling for other reasons, like water compliance determinations or research or MS4s. Now I'm going to dive in a little bit more into the data that I will be presenting today. We identified 12 monitoring stations located in 4 different estuarine regions of the Big Cypress Basin. And the data presented from those stations ranges from January 2012 through December of 2022. I'll be presenting annual summaries for 3 main parameters: chlorophyll, total nitrogen, and total phosphorus for these 12 stations and for each of the estuarine regions. And there will be a comparison of water quality for each of these regions against the numeric nutrient criteria. So these are the district stations in the Southwest Big Cypress Basin region, and they serve somewhat as sentinel sites for anthropogenic sources upstream of the estuarine areas. And what this means is that when the district implements projects upstream, these stations are meant to capture and be representative of what is coming into that estuarine region. So they're meant to capture, for example, we have TTI 75, TDI 75, C, B, and they're meant to capture what's going on upstream and is being discharged into the estuarine region. And this helps demonstrate projects upstream are not degrading water quality, for example, in that region. And these sites, all of them are sampled every other month. So now a little bit about numeric nutrient criteria. So the FDEP sets criteria throughout the state. Some of this water quality criteria can be narrative criteria and other can be numeric criteria. Numeric criteria is established in regions where FDEP knows that certain parameters can create an imbalance to the system. And in those instances, they set numeric criteria for these parameters. Depending on the need, FDEP sets criteria by region, which encompasses multiple stations, or by site. So this helps them understand a little bit better what is causing impairment or not causing impairment. So the numeric nutrient criteria is set forth by the Water Quality Standard Rule in the Florida Administrative Code 62-302-532. And How FDEP sets the estuarine regions depends largely on the hydrologic and water quality characteristics of each region. So not every region is created equal. So not every region has the same hydrologic and water quality characteristics. FDEP used data from 1995 to 2009 as a baseline to establish baseline conditions within these 4 regions that within all regions, but particularly the 4 regions that I'll be presenting. And they evaluated based on TP, TN, and chlorophyll A, which is why I am presenting these 3 parameters today. FDEP looks at the annual geometric mean, and they base their determination on a 3-year rolling evaluation. So I'd like for the public to keep that in mind as I present this and present the data. And then these are the 4 estuarine regions. As we can see here, we have Collier Inshore, Rookery Bay, Marco Island, Blackwater River, and Gulf Islands estuarine regions. We can see here on the top right, the table that shows each estuarine region with their numeric nutrient criteria. Like I mentioned earlier, each region is different. So the criteria is different based on the hydrologic and water quality conditions, baseline conditions of each region. So I will start with Collier Inshore. So in this region, the district has 1 station, Rook 455. So this may not encompass what is happening in the entire region. Again, this is the district station, but it can be an indicator of what is upstream, what is being brought to this region. So we see here in the chlorophyll A, we see that the data shows it's trending below the numeric nutrient criteria, and we see the numeric nutrient criteria here with a red dashed line in the graph. And then for annual total nitrogen, we see the data trending above the numeric nutrient criteria. And for total phosphorus, the data is trending below the numeric nutrient criteria. Now, I want to note that even though you may see 2 dots here that are teal, that are above the numeric nutrient criteria, it's a 3-year rolling evaluation. So the previous 2 years are not above. That means that the whole set is considered below the numeric nutrient criteria. Now moving on to the Rookery Bay Marco Island region. Here we have 2 stations, and for annual chlorophyll, we can observe that the data is trending below the numeric nutrient criteria. For total nitrogen, the data trends above the numeric nutrient criteria, and for total phosphorus, the data trends below numeric nutrient criteria. For the Blackwater River estuarine region, we observe annual chlorophyll trending below the numeric nutrient criteria, total nitrogen trending above, and total phosphorus trending below, except for years 2019 to 2021. So here's where the 3-year evaluation comes in. We see that for year 2018, the data trends above. However, the previous 2 years are trending below. So that means 2018 trends below. 2019, now we see that 2019 and 2018 are trending above. So that means that that year it trends above. 2020, we have all 3 years trending above, and 2021, even though that year trended below, we have the previous 2 years trending above for phosphorus. So I just want to make that clear in case there's some questions about that. And for the Gulf Islands and estuarine region, we see chlorophyll A trending below, total nitrogen trending above, except for 2017. And total phosphorus trending below the numeric nutrient criteria, except for years 2019 through 2021. This is going to be the last of the regions. And so I want to summarize that the district monitors the district monitoring not only helps FDEP to track water quality standards, but it also allows them to determine if the water quality of a body is being improved or maintained, or if it's being degraded as well. The district monitors to determine considerations of projects upstream and to evaluate project performance. And the monitoring and evaluation of the receiving water body is very important in coming up with adequate design parameters for future projects or to perform projects upstream that don't impact the downstream regions. Understanding these trends and determining the trends, not only for these parameters, but overall, can help create an understanding of the water quality of the region over time. And the increase or decrease in concentrations can be used to identify if additional upstream projects are needed or required. The district collaborates with FDEP and other agencies to minimize duplication. We don't want 3 agencies sampling the same site. We allocate appropriate resources to conduct monitoring in different regions, and we collaborate to improve monitoring wherever necessary. So before moving on to questions, I want to thank my colleague and principal scientist, Nenad Irikanen, who was a pivotal part in performing and putting together this presentation and presenting the data that I gave today. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions that the board may have. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you for your presentation. Board comments and questions. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, if you refresh my memory, please, are the areas you highlighted today the only areas where numeric nutrient criteria was established for us here within our basin, or is that just kind of where we focused on the review of data?
Correct. That is where we're focusing and reviewing the data today. Yes.
Okay.
The FDEP sets a numeric nutrient criteria a little bit further north as well. There's different estuarine regions as well. And they also set criteria for streams. So I did not look into the upstream or stream criteria today, just this particular.
Yeah, presumably we're collecting from other areas, monitoring that, and then.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Andy, go ahead.
Yes, Christine, as we talked earlier this week, the number one concern I had was the lack of sampling sites in the southern area. And I brought along one of my charts that I use to, when I'm bored in a meeting, to look at spots to go fishing, which just happens to cover this area. So afterwards, I'll be glad to point out a few areas where you can enhance that. And for the same comment I had with Ansel's presentation a few minutes ago, is that my concern is that we got a busted sewage treatment plant, and we got people that we have commercial harvesting of crabs and all kinds of other things, fish, and obviously recreational angling going on. So we're consuming this stuff and we may not have good data. So that's one concern. Is the other thing I had was, is there areas that you could say are the perfect water quality in this area that you can say, all right, this area is deficient, but this area is the best area that we could use as the control?
Okay, so to address your first comment, thank you for both your questions. We did immediately after our meeting set up a meeting with FDEP to look a little bit more into particularly the region that you pointed out a little bit south of Everglades City.
Okay.
And we have a meeting coming up
Okay.
this May 10th about that particular subject. As for the perfect water quality in the region, I cannot speak to that. I would have to look at a wider data set.
Yes, I understand.
And a little bit further north in order to answer the question, but I'd be very glad to look into that and come back to the board with a comparison of all the estuarine regions, even further north from Marco Island, like even maybe the whole coastal area, and perhaps set a comparison between all the regions that lie in the big Cypress Basin estuarine area.
Yeah, that would be, it may even come from like the panhandle or areas that are less influenced by human activity. I would speculate. I don't know if you have the access to that data, but it'd be kind of interesting to see what is the perfect water quality. How did it look before, when the Calusas were living here before us?
We have to remember that they all have particular hydrologic and water quality criteria that's kind of specific to that one region.
Mhm.
So they may not compare, it may not be an apples to apples, because if we're comparing different
I understand, yeah.
hydrological, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christina, you briefed us a lot of charts from the 3-year average of sampling, and you presented it in a way that was easy to understand on whether it was above or below or how it was trending. But what I didn't hear was what should be the takeaways from your report today? What is it that this board needs to know, and what are the next steps?
Could I defer to Stuart on that one?
All right, coming up is Stuart Van Horn. He's the Bureau Chief for our South Florida Water Management District for water quality.
That's a really good question. I think the takeaway today is when you look at the charts, you see that nitrogen levels are generally above what the criteria is. Phosphorus doesn't seem to be a problem. So that seems to be indicative of possibly two things. One is that you've got a nitrogen source that is in the upstream watershed. It could be coming from agriculture. It also could be coming from, the second reason is that you've got some biogeochemical processes that are occurring in the estuary and their mangroves. And if you have more freshwater input, that might improve the cycling of nitrogen, and you may be able to, maybe those levels might come down. So the levels that we're seeing in the charts are not orders of magnitude high. These are actually very low nutrient criteria levels that DEP has set for this particular area. If you go up to the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie, the criteria that they've set for nitrogen is actually double or 2.5 times what these nitrogen levels are down here in the Southwest region. So with looking at areas where there's opportunities to do to cooperate with FDACs and DEP, where you've got agricultural issues that might be contributing to nitrogen, that's an area of opportunity. And then the other is that we're doing Picayune Strand, which is hydrologic restoration. So you're bringing more fresh water. You've got, I believe you got Henderson Creek restoration going on. You got Picayune Strand. More fresh water coming down into these areas is going to be helpful. And so hopefully in the future, we see a trajectory where these nitrogen levels are starting to come down over time.
Let's go to that slide that shows the 4 areas we're talking about, if we could, please.
Is it that one?
Go to where we see the whole coastline, I think would be better. 10. Yep, there you. Okay, so I see we're talking about.
So up at Rook 455, I believe that's sort of like the terminal end of where water comes down through Henderson Creek. And then all the rest of the sites to the west, like in the green areas, the 75B and going all the way over to 52 in the lower right-hand corner. A lot of that is to the creeks that are getting their freshwater inputs from along Tamiami Trail through all the coverts, north of Picayune Strand, and then rainfall within the estuary.
And what Stuart, I didn't hear you say when you mentioned that this has a higher nutrient level standard, was that, doesn't this begin the outstanding Florida waters for these criterion?
These areas are outstanding Florida waters, and that means that when projects are being developed, like when we at the district, when we're being permitted through for Picayune Strand restoration, we have to take into recognition that the downstream receiving water where restoration waters are going to go towards is an outstanding Florida water. So, it forwards, there's more responsibility to make sure that as the project is implemented, it's not going to degrade, and hopefully it's going to improve the water quality. So it's an extra layer that DEP requires that we provide reasonable assurance that water quality is going to be maintained or is going to improve. And hopefully with hydrologic restoration, this area, this OFW will improve over time. The nutrient levels, you had mentioned that these are higher standards. So it means they're more stringent. It's a lower number. So it's a higher standard, more stringent in that case, but also it represents that for this particular area, DP has set those levels more stringent because of it's a marine area of class 2. You have shellfish harvesting. So it's also more important in that regard. And, just the area itself is more unique than other areas in Florida. Like I mentioned, the Caloosahatchee, the St. Lucie, where the levels can be a little less stringent because that water body will support aquatic life, and organisms will survive in a higher level of nutrient inputs as opposed to this area.
So when I look at this chart, Stuart, on the right here, and I look at total phosphorus levels, for example, or we can go to nitrogen next. And I look at the number, let's say between 46 and 53. What's the significance in those seven, the number difference would be 7? I mean, is that significant? Are these basically pretty close together? What's the significance of that?
Yeah, so
Number.
why does it range from 0.25 to 0.44, and what's the significance of that difference? Why is it?
No, I'm in phosphorus, but the same thing, we can do nitrogen.
Well, it's whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus, the variation is dependent on, so DEP is looking at this information, trying to identify what the particular characteristics are of that specific region, what is in it, what's being done, what are they trying to protect. So from DEP's perspective, they've determined that you don't have to have one glove size fits all where the number is the same for all region. There is variation in the data. There's variation in what's in that system. So they're allowing the numbers to be slightly different. Basically, from their perspective is that if you maintain the water at that level, then there's no harm to the water body.
I guess what I'm asking is, should I be saying that one water body is better or worse than another based upon these numbers? How significant is the difference between, let's take Collier inshore, having 0.25 and Rookery Bay, Marco Island has 0.3, or in the case of phosphorus, 32 versus 46. Is that a significant difference? Is that an average difference? Is it it's a statistical non-issue? I mean, what should I be taking from that?
So I think I understand your question. So does it mean something that one water body versus the other is better water quality based on the standard that they set? So if one area is 0.25 and the other one's 0.44, is the 0.44 worse than 0.25? No, the answer is that for each water body, they are comparable in terms of the health of the system. So you shouldn't look at it from that perspective. It's looking at the data and whether it's trending above. So each of the areas have nitrogen levels that are trending above what is determined to be for good health of that particular region. So when you look across the board, I'm seeing that nitrogen levels are higher typically in all the regions. So from that perspective, all the regions are not balanced in terms of nitrogen. So they're kind of equal weight, that the nitrogen levels need to come down. Does that help?
Well, it helps, but I don't see that in that chart.
Not in this chart, but in the individual graphics.
Correct. So I was just trying to get to, run to ground what you're trying to show me in this chart. That's all.
Okay, so this is what the criteria that DEP had set, that they have said is if you maintain that level over time, that water body will be healthy.
Okay, so that's just the standards.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So it's there's to tell us what the standard are. And when we have a green dot for the sampling site, it means
the colors themselves don't represent anything. It is just in the chart. That's the benchmark that we're shooting for.
Mhm.
So we want our observed data to be at or below that benchmark.
Okay. That's what I was asking. Thank you. Okay. Is there any public comment?
This just in, Brad Cornell.
Thanks. Brad Cornell with Audubon. So one of the issues as I look at the estuarine water quality monitoring is that the connection between upstream and downstream is a problem in that there aren't numeric nutrient criteria for those connections for the canals, as the water comes from, like, for instance, Picayune Strand. So we got that problem. So the downstream outstanding Florida waters are going to be impacted by water quality upstream that is more difficult to control. And From what I have seen in the areas where the Picayune Strand flows are going to be moving, that water quality is about 310 parts per billion of phosphorus, which is way above what you would want downstream in the estuaries. And so that issue, to solve the problem of making sure that the outstanding Florida waters are not impacted by the restoration flows as they move through what is around that Tomato Road US 41 area, is going to be a big challenge. And so I think you all have talked about, and the district and many of the stakeholders in this process have been looking at that problem. How do we avoid nutrient pollution in our outstanding Florida waters? It's going to have to come down to source controls and collaboration with farmers, and figuring out ways that FDACS and DEP and the district can all get together on one page and see how we can solve this problem together. It's not going to go away on its own. And I don't think that you can say the restoration flows on their own are going to dilute that. That's a lot of nutrient pollution, and we're going to have to figure out how to build STAs, how to control it at the source. So I put that out there. Just looking at the numbers, I don't think we're going to get there unless we do something proactive.
Thank you, Brad. And that's what I was wondering. Do we have other water quality monitoring stations north of 41 in this region?
Yeah, we either have, he had mentioned Tomato Road, so we've got monitoring that's along 41. And also we're going to be establishing more monitoring networks as Picayune Strand is coming in for a landing. There'll be more monitoring along that area. I think for the district's monitoring upstream, we stop at Tomato Road. We don't go farther north on 41 up into the watershed. Collier County does that.
Okay, so Tomato Road would be our last
Yes,
water quality monitoring station, and that's not a part of this report, or it is?
it is not.
Okay,
But he is correct. The levels that he stated, that's what we've seen in the data. It's 300 parts to 330 parts per billion phosphorus.
yeah, and I'm very familiar with what he highlighted, because we've been having discussions for the last couple of years, probably 3 years now, on trying to address that in a collaborative way, so that when Picayune Strand comes online, that we ensure that the water quality flowing into the 10,000 islands is the highest quality possible. We're not concerned about the sheet flow from the restoration project, right? It's the mixing that is the real issue here. So I want to clarify that, because sometimes we refer to Picayune Strand Restoration Project when the restoration is going to restore the natural sheet flow and the natural area, and hopefully improve water quality significantly. But it's whether or not the mixing of that water with the other polluted water that's in the area, right, that we're monitoring, will have an impact on outstanding Florida water. So I think that's an important area that we need to keep an eye on. Okay, any other public comment?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for coming over today. Appreciate it. Okay, next is the Big Cypress Basin Capital Plan update with Lucine Dadrian. It's nice to have you back. You know, when Lucine comes to the Basin Board, there's some big information that's coming at us, so.
Thank you. I really appreciate the warm welcome, Madam Chair and Basin Board members. Always happy to come and make this presentation and show the great work that staff is doing, and whether it's engineering, construction, the H&H group, coordinating with field operations. It takes a big team across the district to actually get work done. So I wanted to start with some of the projects that we have completed in construction. So Cypress #1 structure was commenced back in August of 2021. And we completed the project in October this past year. It looks great. It's an amazing project. The county is currently doing its portion of the canal work for relocating Cypress Canal. We also have a temporary connection of the structure to the old canal so that we can exercise the structure as needed. So you can see the aerial view here of the structure and some other pictures. So very exciting that this work is complete and ready to accept Collier County's work. The next project that we're complete, and you can see the ribbon cutting on the left, is the remote ops at Court 2 and the generator building construction at Vaca Union 5. As you all know, Court 2 is the furthest for O&M to get to, and so making this remotely operable has been a big help in regards to managing water and being timely in opening gates and closing them as needed for both flood control and dry season issues with holding water or groundwater. So that work was also completed in October of 2022. And here on the right, you can see the new facility with the generator building. So the next project, not complete, but is in construction. This was the phase 2 of Stilling well platform installations. This helps us with either remote operations or it helps us with reading of the water levels to be able to operate structures. So all sites are ongoing. We anticipate Airport Road 2 and County Road 951 North sites to be online by the summer. And then Henderson Creek platform will be online in the fall of 2023. So we've been talking about this project for a while. It was a multi-phase project bringing structures along for remote operations. And this is our final phase of that, and that is building a new tower. We have been looking at the Lake Trafford site. So initially, we looked at this initial site here on the left, and we had an FAA approval for the 300-foot tower, but we had extreme gopher tortoise impacts. So we went back to the board or to the drawing board to say, where can we move this to? So we looked at this other site down below, alternative 2, and this had less impacts, but we received a denial from FAA on the tower height that we needed to see 2 towers. So it would speak to Vaca Union and Picayune Strand, and it would also speak to C43 tower in the West Coast. And that building this tower gets us into the Western Spur and brings us online and able to see from headquarters and across the district, and will make this a very reliable system for the basin. This is a big deal, I think. So we moved forward after this denial and we looked at alternative 3. Again, limited gopher tortoise impacts. We think we'll have this approval, but we are still pending that approval from FAA. And hopefully we can restart design. We're gearing up with our contracts to get new survey, new geotech. So we're ready to go once we get that approval, but we haven't received it yet. So hopefully, if all goes as planned, we plan on starting construction in the summer of 2024 and commencing that work. The next project I'd like to describe is in design or moving into design. It's the I-75 Canal Weir number 2 weir replacement project. It's an old structure, as you can see here on the left. It's deficient and does not have remote ops. By replacing it, we would be able to remotely operate the structure, provide dry season groundwater recharge, as well as reducing discharges to Naples Bay. So we are working on this work order. We're ready to kick it off in the next month or so, utilizing same consultant that did Cypress 1 to achieve benefits and efficiencies in cost and time. So estimating design completion in 2024. So this next system of structures, Upper Vaca Union, has 3 structures. And the concept is to take 3 down to 2. But instead of kicking off modeling and design this year, we are waiting for the level of service modeling tool development to be complete. And once that is complete, we will move into modeling this system and this canal system in January of 2024. That'll help us better inform our design and what needs to be replaced on this canal. So that also includes, I know we've done work at Faka Union 5, but we're looking to take those 12 gates and make them 6 larger gates. As you can see, debris gets caught on these gates due to the size and the width of them. So that will be one more improvement for flood control that we move out on in design. So one of the main reasons I'm here today is to talk about the 5-year capital program. And we have made some changes from preliminary to tentative. So I mentioned that we are waiting for the level of service modeling tool, and that's one of the reasons why we've moved out design starts on the Upper Faka Union replacement, as well as Henderson Creek 1 and HC 1A. We added funding to the remote monitoring communications. This is where the tower line sits. We've added money based on information that we know about what it's going to cost. Akeen's going to present on Corkscrew Canal, what's happening there and how his efforts and his team will inform the design going forward for this area. So we're in a holding pattern for that, but have funding for it as needed for modeling. We've aligned the I-71 canal weir number 1 weir removal to tie into the end of construction of weir number 1. So we've made some adjustments and we've flattened it out to meet the timelines of when we think we'll get the work done, as well as meeting the budget requirements for the basin. And that's all I have, and open for questions.
Thank you, Lucian. I appreciate your presentation. Board member questions?
Listen, do you think there'll be a time, maybe it's to the right side of your analysis, meaning in the out years, that we'll just have so many projects complete, we're kind of headed down to just repairs and maintenance?
I actually was thinking about that today on the way here. I'm looking forward to that time period, but maybe what would happen is we move more into canal projects, because canal projects are also expensive. And we always, we always look risk-based and prioritize structures first, because that's really, how you're managing your water. But the next steps would be canals.
Mhm.
So we may end up spending just as much down the road.
I figure that there'll be need for something that right now we have priorities on projects that are before us. And then there may be other things like making the canals add curves to them and not so they aren't so straight, and make them prettier. Maybe.
I have a question concerning the tower. Certainly that capital project is very important to the basin and the district as a whole. With us having to readjust site locations, now we're on the 3rd site location. And you mentioned that construction, we're looking at summer of 2024. And having to regroup for these different locations, how far behind is that date from our original date? Are we 6 months or?
I think it's about 6 months.
About 6 months. So we lost about 6 months having to regroup and find other sites in that. Okay. All right. Well, that's not necessarily what we hoped for, but that's what it is. Is there any public comment on this?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Lucian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to take a 5-minute stretch break before we have Akeen come on. So 5 minutes. We'll get back in 12:44.
Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you. I'd like to reconvene the Big Cypress Basin meeting and begin with the Corkscrew Comprehensive Hydrologic Modeling and Restoration Initiative with Mr. Akin Owasana. Welcome, Akin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here today to give you an update on what we've been doing towards having a Corkscrew Comprehensive Hydrologic Modeling and Restoration Study or initiative moved along. I'd like to start off, first of all, by providing a little bit of background and context. So there have been many flood studies in the area. I'll share some of them with you later. Also, we've been doing water supply plans and studies within the area, and there have been a number of environmental studies. Many of those studies are single issue focused, and they use tools that are appropriate for that purpose. But at the same time as all of this work's going on, folks in Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, the Audubon folks, have noticed a change in hydro period, and they came to the board, presented to you. You indicated some interest in having us engage with them, and you charged us with that, I think following a presentation they had in 2021. What we're hoping you'll see going forward is that we will be coming to you more frequently with updates as this initiative ramps up. We're approaching a key milestone. I think we'll be presenting to you in the October meeting on the status of the tool development that I think Lucine mentioned. They were waiting on for some work in the capital project and will be key to us executing this comprehensive study in Corkscrew. Before we get started, I thought I would share this slide to help everybody get a feel. When we talk about Corkscrew, sometimes we all mean different things. And so I thought I'll share this particular graphic. This was from the CREW, that's Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed report for 2022. What it shows is essentially the Corkscrew watershed. And what I wanted to highlight is that there are a number of hydrologic units within the Corkscrew watershed or the CREW lands. You have Flint Pen Strand, Birdrookery, the Swamp Sanctuary, which is what many people think about when they say Corkscrew or the marsh, and also Camp Key Strand. But when we're talking about the comprehensive study, we'll be looking at the entire watershed, which includes all of these hydrologic units. Going back to an old study that I've shared with you in the past, the Southley watershed that was done, the study that was done back in 1999, provided what the system might have looked at in 1940. I share this to show how the Corkscrew watershed would have drained ultimately to the Gulf. They did an update of that product representing 1995 type conditions. And at the time, it was to show the constrictions to that system, but it really defines the extent of what our system looks like today. I share this just to highlight my next slide. This slide, the image you're looking at is an aerial imagery showing the Corkscrew system, the watershed. That's the deep greens. It shows the Gulf of Mexico to the left side of the screen. And we have this large wetland system, more than 100 square miles, that is supposed to be wet, and mostly is kept wet. And the challenge we have is that when you have rain on top of a wet system, the water moves quickly, you have quick runoff, and it needs to make its way to tide, which would be to the Gulf. And it needs to go through the areas downstream of the marsh, which is areas where there are communities and will live. And the concern is that you might have increased flood risk in those areas if it's not properly managed. While you are balancing that flood risk, you also want to make sure that you don't create by actions that you take to mitigate the flood risk, a fire risk. And I think in recent conversation over the last few days, I think I was reminded that in this area, you actually had some fire to contend with very recently. So with that in the back, I mentioned I'll talk about some of the flood studies. There have been many. The 1995 floods resulted in the Southley watershed study done in 1999. It's a seminal study within the area. Was updated subsequently. There's a Southley flood mitigation plan recently completed post-Irma. And the district, we did a flood protection level of service study in this area that completed in 2018. And at the end of that study, in addition to the things we recommended for flood protection, we also identified the need to enhance the modeling tool we had within this region. I also mentioned that there have been environmental studies, and this is a quick chronology of the most recent events. About 2019, the team from Audubon was here to talk to you about what they were observing at Lettuce Lake area. At the time, their focus was on the fact that the hydro period was reducing. I think more recently, they've been looking at the peak stages also, and they are seeing some differences. It resulted in funding from the board to the Audubon team, collaborative funding with the Big Cypress Basin staff to look at the potential causes or possible causes of what they were observing. And that involved the development of a model that was presented to the board back in 2021. Almost simultaneous with that effort, the district provided a little bit of funding to the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership, SNEP, to look at the area just east of, or just west of where the Audubon team was looking at. It's still the same corkscrew system, but looking at what happened as you look towards the Imperial River part of it. And what both of these studies did was, instead of just looking at flooding, they tried to look at other things that went beyond flooding. They looked at dry season conditions. They looked at potential causes of changes that they were seeing in the natural areas. What followed was a series of engagements by the Big Cypress Basin Board and the district. I mentioned the Audubon corkscrew work. There was a cost share funding that was provided of about $100,000. There was staff technical support, and the collaboration that resulted from that is still ongoing. I mentioned the SNEP work, which is completed now. And also the big part was making sure that the original tool we're enhancing was able to help with this study. That work is ongoing. We'll be talking to you about that in October. At the time, and what I anticipate will be the next steps going forward, was we identified a need for data acquisition. That work's mostly done now. We identified the need to get the tool ready. That will be ended this year. We identified the need to do some kind of a public planning process to look at the restoration needs in corkscrew and make sure that it was something that was comprehensive. We identified the need to find projects that could be expedited and implemented to make sure that we're taking action quickly. And Lucina in her presentation talked about COC 3. That's the project that's currently in your capital plan that we believe that as soon as we get some information from this study that we start, we may be able to peel off and make some early decisions on and get started. So a little bit more on the collaboration with the Audubon team. We've been holding quarterly meetings, Brad and the team here, with folks from West Palm and from part of the Audubon team. And they identified several needs, many of which we've acted upon. They identified the need for regional topography. They identified the need for some more monitoring, and a little bit more in a minute on both of those. They acknowledged the need for the development of the regional tool and the need to incorporate what we've learned from the other models that have recently completed into that tool improvement, as well as the need to be able to take some early action. And on this slide, I kind of have the COC 3 that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Regarding topographic data improvement, you provided about $200,000 in funding to do some survey, and we're able to use that to get about 37 miles of a survey corridor surveyed. The map on the inset there kind of shows the lines in orange with where the survey data was done. And that data has already proven useful as we've incorporated it into the model that's been done. With regards to the monitoring, you provided some funding, and the team was able to, by working with USGS, leverage that to get 5 new sites added in this area to monitor water levels in corkscrew. While they would not fall within or collect data that could be used in our tool development as part of the calibration, they're still going to be useful for our ultimate assessment within this region. The third thing, and I'll spend a little bit time on the tool development. This was an initiative about $800,000 worth of work that you funded. It kicked off in September of 2021. It took the modeling that was done for the level of service work and it's improving it by incorporating new information we have, including information generated from the Audubon modeling team and from the Chinep modeling exercise that were done that I mentioned earlier. It's scheduled to be completed in December, though the model itself will be significantly done by the end of this fiscal year, and we'll be presenting to you on that in October. But the cleanup required to end the project will extend all the way through the end of the calendar year. So here's a quick summary of the various activities that I've spoken about. Is just one single page. The items with the check marks are the things we've done. The items with dates are the things that are ongoing, where we have likely completion dates. And there are a number of things that we are beginning to talk about that have not yet fully started, that are critical for the kickoff of the comprehensive study and its completion and recommendations of projects to you. And Mr. Hill, you mentioned whether we would have a fall-off in potential expenditures. I think there may be recommendations coming from this study that I'll be happy to fill the gap if that comes up. So what should you expect going forward? We begin to talk to potential partners or collaborating groups or agencies about the comprehensive study and the format it could take. There are more than one ways we could do this study, and we wanted to make sure that we could talk to the potential partners and get on the same page and have good agreement on how we should proceed with this study to get the best outcome. We know we're going to finish development of the original tool and we'll release it for use for multiple purposes, this study, as well as to support some of the initiatives in the capital project that Lucini mentioned earlier. We're working through the process of securing the appropriate resources to do this work, budgets on your side, staffing on your side and on my side. And we're looking to initiate the study in fiscal 24. We intend to bring you periodic updates, key milestones, but just periodic update on the progress of the work. And I believe that was my last slide, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Akin. Appreciate your presentation. Vice Chair Waters.
Thanks, Akin. The question I've gotten based on trying to find the slide with where your check marks are, but it may be where you are now in terms of it looks like the next line item to be checked is hydrogeologic sensitivity. And so that was kind of where my question was when I see the info and the data that we've got that shows these departures from typical water levels to what we're seeing, for decades and decades to what we're seeing now. Seems like the departure really starts to happen when we get out of wet season, move into dry season, and that would tend to make me think it's probably something groundwater related, where suddenly the rain stops, everybody's using groundwater, and that's pulling water out of the wetland system. So I was curious, how are we kind of calibrating our model for water use and for groundwater flow? Because that really, it's easy is probably not the right word, but it's fairly concrete to be able to calibrate something when we know we have stages, when we know what the rainfall is. Water use is a little probably more difficult to approximate. And so do we just look at people's permits and say, all right, we're going to assume what people reported is what they pulled out of the ground and then calibrate based on that? Or how do we do that exactly?
So this would be dealt with in a little bit more detail in our October presentation, but I'll give you a quick overview. In addition to the challenges you mentioned, there's also domestic self-supply that's not metered by anybody.
Yeah.
So there are some unknowns that we have to make best professional judgment on how we represent them. And the approach that's typically taken is twofold. We make our best assumptions and we go through a calibration process with data that we use to tune parameters and test those assumptions. Then we set aside some data that we don't use in the calibration, and we use a validation process to see if the assumptions we made and the parameters we arrived at are able to allow the model to be predictive. if they're able to handle the validation data set well and predict how the system might respond properly, then we have some confidence in the model. So that's the process that the team from Basin is using. What makes this a little bit more rigorous than what we typically would do is I mentioned that we're building this comprehensive model to be able to look at multiple issues. Usually for flood studies, we use event models that work on a very small time scale. You do 30 days, you do small increments of time, and you try to be able to see what's happening with your surface system under wet conditions. We're calibrating the model to be able to represent those well using known events, known storms in the past. But we also want to be able to do long-term analysis to look at things like hydro periods. How does things happen in a drought? And for that, you need a model that's able to simulate longer period of records. They use different time scales to be able to capture those processes. And so we're trying to make sure that the models that's delivered at the end of the day would allow us to do both types of work. Because for a comprehensive study, we need to look at the flood risk. We need to look at the impact or potential impact to water supply and the impact of the environment, changes in hydro period and peak stages. So what you would see in October would be the summary of how we've gone through that effort, and hopefully maybe a quick overview of how successful we were at developing the tool to be able to do that. But it's a challenge, and it would involve, would arrive at the endpoint based on our best judgment that the tool as developed and calibrated is sufficient to answer the questions we anticipate from the various uses. This study, the level of service when we come back, and the design related work for the structures that our capital program already encompasses.
Okay. And then my assumption would be then too, that the tool would allow us, as we look at this and go, all right, how do we make changes that will help to fix, the historical departures we're seeing. That tool would allow us to say, okay, if we, encourage somebody to get off of the groundwater aquifer and go deeper, here would be the benefit, or, encourage people to, better conserve water, here would be the benefit, and we can evaluate what the impact of changes would be long-term on an annual period.
Yes, that's the intended purpose.
Yeah.
We want to be able to represent the system response to a number of stressors, including changes to groundwater. All of the stressors that were identified when the Audubon team came, they talked about the potential water supply causes, ag of domestic self-supply, the flood control with canals and potential impacts those may have, and a couple of other things, change in vegetation and ET. The tool we've picked would be able to look at all of those potential stressors. And we just want to be able to use it to test scenarios out and see what kind of courses of action we could recommend to achieve the required restoration goal that we arrive at the start of the project, while preserving level of service, water supply, and all of the other things that are important within our mission.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
Keen, we talked about a number of things earlier this week, but I wanted to take my question a little bit in a different direction. You've studied corkscrew in depth for many, many years. I'm wondering if you could learn what you've learned from that model, apply it throughout our area of responsibility, roughly Collier County. Is it possible to create models and speculate on what future trends will bring in terms of our water supply over time by what you've learned from corkscrew? And
so I won't take credit for having studied corkscrew extensively. Maybe at the end of this study, I will be able to. But yes, we've done models within this region for many years. And I went to this slide to show you the footprint of the original model we're creating. It will allow us to answer many questions. And one of the things I try to caution is the fact you have a model that covers an area doesn't mean it's immediately useful. But if you look at the scope of the model, what the model was built to do, it can tell you the kind of things you can do. And this model is built to be able to answer flood-related questions, water supply-related questions, and environmental-related questions, changes in system response, essentially. So yes, we'll be able to use it, but at the end of the day, the question that's being posed will determine if this is the best tool, or if we need to zoom into a different scale or do something. But across the footprint of this model, we will be able to provide some insight into how the system would respond to whatever the stressors are that are being asked, so long as it's consistent with what we scoped into the model.
Okay. And looking forward with the advent of artificial intelligence and other high computing opportunities, it seems like that would impact your responsibilities more than other people in the water district.
We're kind of finding out that it's going to be all of us, because even from the pure sciences, AI and machine learning and deep learning is allowing us to do potentially do a number of things that maybe we couldn't do before. But this is an area that my team's been looking at. I think first, the study we commissioned on deep learning and machine learning was about 6 or 7 years ago. We've been exploring this. Now we're leveraging some of the things on the periphery. We have a tool we call the I model, which inverses the process. Usually in most traditional modeling exercises, you start with what you know, and then you try to find what you don't know. With the I model, you start with what you want, and you go back to what you must do to get what you want. And a lot of that is because of techniques that have been developed, things like genetic algorithm that allows you to leverage some machine learning techniques. So we are doing a few things. I think it's still a wide open field. I have folks on the staff who are very excited at exploring more things. I don't know when we'll put them to use on a practical project just yet. I think right now we're still exploring what it might do for us.
I'm glad to know you're thinking about it. Thank you.
Keen, while you're on this slide, will you explain the red boundary and also the gray boundary?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. I actually put the gray boundary in. The red boundary is the current approximate extent of the regional model we're building. The gray boundary is the extent of the crew lands. And I'd inserted this in this image for today's presentation just to assure you that the model we're building sufficiently covers the entire crew lands and goes beyond it, so that we'll be able to fully evaluate what's happening within the footprint of the Corkscrew watershed. I will be able to look at some of the offsite impacts. Thanks for asking that question.
Now, is that red boundary also the Big Cypress Basin watershed? Is that the entire watershed that you have briefed this board on, or no?
It's most of it, but it's the areas where essentially it's almost the entire watershed, but it's the area where we could get to maybe a reasonable boundary or specify something for the purposes of modeling. But yes, you'll notice that this goes outside of Collier County, includes parts of Lee County, because of that exercise that we did a few years ago.
Yes, that's what I was referring to, is that update you gave us a few years ago. The one thing here about your efforts, I just want to say how important they are to the Big Cypress Basin and the district as a whole. I mean, this is a significant effort to actually model this watershed, and more specifically to focus on parts of the watershed, such as the Corkscrew area. And I'd like to see this effort move a little more quickly, since we began it roughly 4 years ago. Since I've been involved, I should say. You started it before I came to the board. And, I hope that as we move forward with this, that we can actually get a couple of things done on the way, like you mentioned Cork 3, or if there's something there, because I think the risk of a long-term effort is, one, keeping it focused and keeping it moving forward to completion. That's one of the challenges. The other challenge I see from a water perspective is that these areas are under pressure for development and everything else all around it. So we can use this tool, but hopefully we will still have a lot of our natural areas around that we can protect, and we know what to focus on in terms of their impact. So great work. And this is really a significant effort here in the Big Cypress Basin. This is going to be amazing when it's done, especially for our mission with flood control and water supply, those issues that we have with FACA Union drying up. Maybe that'll help us with that area. I mean, this has a lot of potential. So I appreciate your work on this. Is there any public comment?
Yes, ma'am. Your first registered speaker is Sean Clem, and she will be followed by Brad Cornell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. I'm Dr. Sean Clem. I'm the Director of Research for Audubon, Florida at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And I just wanted to thank the district, particularly Keen and his team, Lisa and your team, for your continued attention to the hydrologic disruption of the Corkscrew watershed and recognizing the need for hydrologic restoration. Particular thanks to Madam Chair, who has not only kept the spotlight on the need for this, but got her boots on the ground and seen what's going on out there and, recognize the need for, protecting the ecology of the region. On behalf of Audubon, Florida, we thank the staff at BCB and the district offices. We look forward to moving forward together on this, finding any opportunities for hydrologic relief in the short term, but ensuring we're able to meet hydrologic targets for conserving Corkscrew for the long term. And of course, when I say Corkscrew, I mean the whole watershed, the Crew land surrounding the sanctuary itself. So thank you for continued work, and we look forward to continuing to move forward together with you guys on this.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, your final speaker for this item is Brad Cornell.
Thanks, Brad Cornell with Audubon again. I want to add my thanks to the board and the district and to the staff for the collaboration and the support that we have seen for solving the problems at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. There are a couple of themes in this that I want to highlight. One is that models are great, and this will be a fantastic tool. And I know how excited Akin is, and Kent and everybody is to develop a wonderful model. And we're excited too, to the extent that this is going to provide the foundation and the means to devise and plan restoration projects that are going to solve real problems on the ground or in the water, to be more specific. So that's what we really are celebrating in hearing Akin's report. To that end, I also want to emphasize what Dr. Clem just mentioned briefly, which is the importance of looking for some low-hanging fruit on the way. And Madam Chair, you've been really good at doing that on other projects. I'm thinking of Picayune Strand. Let's not wait 10 years until we have the completed project. Let's see what we can do along the way. And I think that applies here. And in our discussions with your staff and with Akin and his staff, I think that's what we're all looking for. And so things like collaborating with some of the stakeholders like Collier County and utilities and the neighbors and Golden Gate Estates, Shady Hollow folks, Lee County. There's a lot of opportunities that would be, quote, no regrets kind of actions. So let's look for those and on our way to finding the wider, larger solutions. And I also want to flag the role that when we solve hydrologic problems for the Crew system, for the large watershed, that this is something that benefits everybody. It benefits wildlife, it benefits flood protection. We're not asking to abandon flood protection for the people who live there, but what we're trying to figure out, and this is a larger Everglades restoration challenge, how do we protect watersheds and ecosystems and habitats at the same time as providing levels of service that people have come to count on? And that's a real challenge. It's an ecological challenge and it's an engineering challenge. So I'm looking forward to collaborating on that with all of us together at that table. And so thank you for your commitment to that. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I mean, it goes without saying that having such a tremendous team, Akin and the Basin team and the district team, it makes this all possible. plus the stakeholders who spend the time to help us understand the issues or bring things to light. So without that collaboration, we wouldn't be able to get where we are today. And you call it low-hanging fruit, but you know, those are the great ideas that need to come to the table. Anybody who's got an idea, those are the things we talked about on the swamp buggy. What can we do? And I think that I'm very encouraged by today's meeting and the presentation, because if nothing else, we took a step forward today with helping our community and the members of our community understand the Corkscrew watershed, the Crew lands, and Audubon Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. Okay, so I think that is part of it, so people understand what we're talking about and what we're trying to help improve. And that goes back to the conversation that I had with Dr. Clem and Mr. Cornell 4 years ago, well, 4.5 years ago now, about the wood stork nesting. So, I mean, it just takes a while. So I hope we will be able to find some opportunities along the way. But Akin, you've just done a tremendous job in leading this effort. And in the many conversations with me, and I'm sure the other board members, and explaining what direction you think we should go and how we could better make this model. So thank you very much for that. Is there any more public comment on Zoom?
No, ma'am. No hands raised at this point.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to the next item, which is our first opportunity for board comment. Are there any board comments at this time?
One follow-up item. Last board meeting, we talked about EVs, which I know a little bit about, and some good news. Largely as a result of the aggressive pricing of Tesla, the cost of EVs has dropped rather dramatically. I looked for replacement of my Model X, and it's about 25% cheaper than it was when we had our last board meeting. I think that will also filter down to the cost of the vehicles that we were looking at. The only thing I was a little concerned with was we were kind of wed to sticking with the Ford product for reasons that were articulated. But there's others, including Rivian, which offers a pickup truck, and I think that will be more pressured by what Tesla's pricing action. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that to, when the time comes, hopefully the pricing will continue to head lower. So
That could probably save us some money in the budget if that works out.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Appreciate that, Andy. Anything else? Nothing. Okay, we'll go on to the technical reports. Field Station Activity Report, Paul Classy.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Basin board members. My name is Paul Classy. I'm the Structure and Canal Levy Supervisor for the Big Cypress Basin, and I will be presenting the activities report for this. For the overview, we're going to be talking about wet season and store preparations, maintenance activities, 3 months outlook, and open position status. For the wet season and store preparations, we conducted some pre-hurricane helicopter flights to get a general overview of canal conditions. We also taking some pictures and video films for canals and structures to record conditions before any storm event. We are conducting an annual Hurricane Freddy exercise that is going to be conducted next week. And basically, we're going to present a scenario, similar scenario of storm events where we're going to follow procedures. We're going to be working with our emergency operation department, so that way we can follow the right procedures and staff be prepared for any storm event. We're going to continue with our repairs and canal banks and structures to ensure that our structures are operational for any storm event as well. Tree removal projects and vegetation maintenance, and Miller and Faca pump station vegetation removals. First, I want to introduce the new acquisition on the field station, our new equipment, Truckster T50. On the left side, we can see the equipment when it arrives to the field station. On the right side, we got Bender giving some guidance to operator and fleet mechanic, Dre Touche and, Buddy, just to give them some guidance on operations and maintenance for the equipment. Part of that was putting the equipment on action, and on the left side, we can see the trucks are already working on Canal 951 canal. When this time of the year, we got low water flow, and that reliable machine can give us the access to those the stretch of canals and removing some vegetation. On the right side, we can see the same equipment with different attachments, just removing some branches from the banks in Golden Gate Main Canal. As part of our maintenance activities, we conducted some inspections on our canals banks. And we noticed some FACA Union 1 on around the structures. On the left side picture, condition of the banks are really bad. So we decided to create a plan for restore the banks and added some filter fabric material and more riprap to kind of level that slope to the top of the bank, because part of that erosion was due to heavy rain, storm events, and water going over the banks. So we added some more material there to the top of the bank, so that way they can retain that water there and not create more erosion in the future. As part of that maintenance activity as well, the left side, we're looking at downstream side of FACA Union 1 structure, where we noticed some undermining erosion there, creating some concern now that we're heading to wet season. So we decided to add some more material there to reinforce the weirs and, prepare the weirs for any storm event. And that's part of that on the after picture on the right side. And part of that operation was to order some more riprap that was delivered to the banks, and we can see on the left side. And with a great effort from our team and operator, Mako Touche, they managed to create a bed or road in the middle of the canal, as we can see on the right side, to get to the other side of the structure that we have limited access. And as he was retracting back, he was removing that same material and placing it on the downstream side so we can reinforce that erosion. As continuing with our maintenance activities, we conducted some preventive maintenance on our structures, and part of that was gearbox on Coco 2, where we can see technician Dre Touche and Humberto Martinez removing gearbox from the structure to take it to the shop. And the shop technician, William Cucci and Humberto Martinez, opened that gearbox and equipment to check the inner parts and see some damage or repair needed there. All the intention to be prepared for wet season is creating some access point to those stretch of canal where we got limited access. And part of that was on the left side, 951 canal, when we added some access point, and Coco Canal as well. In an effort to be prepared for wet season as well, we had some concern about open positions. So we conducted a career fair at the field station where we successfully filled 5 positions of those. So basically put us in better positions, yes.
That's terrific. What a great result on that.
And for the 3 months outlook, we're going to continue our mechanical harvesting and canal maintenance to ensure that canals are in great condition for any storm event. For structure maintenance, we're going to continue with our repairs and preventive maintenance on the structures, and continue to operate our dry season and wet season operations. And for system operation, we're going to continue to follow support the operations orders. For the comprehensive Everglade restoration projects, the activities reports. On the screen, we can see Miller Pump Station. This is the spreader basin discharge area from the pumping. And we can see on the left side picture, trees are growing really tall, that they can divert the water to not spread out evenly whenever we have to pump some water. So we made a decision to contract a company to cut and mulch all those trees, so that way water can spread out evenly whenever we have to pump for any storm event. For pump station maintenance, we completing our monthly preventive maintenance, installing new new wheels on Mary trash rake. And we contracted a company to install some LED lights to enhance some safety and reduce some electric usage, I'm sorry. Contractor to be starting on FACA pump station, FACA Union Pump Station. And for the 3 months outlook, we're gonna continue to respond to dry and wet season pump orders, continue with our preventive maintenance and repairs to ensure that motors and pumps are full capacity, and install a new pump shaft at Mary Pump Station to be scheduled to be completed before wet season. And that's all I have for you guys, and any questions?
Vice Chair Waters,
None for me. Thank you.
Andy? Okay, I just wanted to ask one question about the erosion. That was some incredible work that the team did to shore that up. But it seemed to me like it was really the area that you fixed was gone. Was that a result of the storm, or was that unusual erosion for that area, or what attributed to that?
It's a combined, storm related, heavy rainfalls and water coming over the banks, create that erosion. So that's what we continuously do some inspections around canals. So just that way we can find those areas that we got concerns. So that was one part of that, and we basically took actions on it.
Okay. All right, because that seemed like a significant amount of work. So good job on that. Really.
Appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity once again.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we have Mr. Brad Jackson for the water conditions report.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Again, Brad Jackson, their Basin engineer, here to give you your water conditions since our last February meeting. So I'll start off as I typically do, go over kind of our monthly summary, and the dry season this year, except for the last couple of weeks, has not disappointed, and it has been drier than even it normally is. So you can see here we're running about a 63% of average for this calendar year so far. And that even takes into account the last month we've had in April, a little bit above average rainfall. So looking just real quickly at March, where did we get rainfall in the basin? Where did we not? And it was pretty much everywhere was where we did not get rainfall. There's a few little hot spots where we got, a couple inches here and there, but generally speaking, only a half an inch pretty much everywhere. Fast forward through this month, you can see the colors on the right are very different this time around. The last few weeks have been wetter than normal. Which is nice for us. We needed the rainfall. We've been extremely dry. The preceding 6 months, besides April, have been extremely dry. So the takeaway here is we're above average, and really the rural areas, natural areas, pretty much everyone's gotten a little bit of rainfall. It's not enough to bring us all the way up to wet season levels, but we're not in wet season. We still want that water to kind of recede a little bit, but this helps take the edge off of the dry season for us. So we're just a couple days from the end of the water year. It starts over on May 1st. So what I've got up here is kind of a summary of when the rain fell and when it did not, starting back in May. And so the important thing to note here is the timing of the rainfall and when it happens throughout the year. So for the year as a whole, we're not too far off from average. But if you combine the surplus we had in wet season and the deficit in the dry season, that gets us to about average. But all of that excess water that happened during the wet season has been used, or through flood control has already been, it's not in the system any longer. So that surplus goes away after the wet season ends. So the dry season, the last few months have really been the most impactful on the conditions we have on the ground today, even though it's been roughly average overall. So on this one, I'll take a little look back in time a little bit. On the left here, this is our conditions map. I just kind of show one of these every time, and it shows the levels inside the canals and where they are at that snapshot in time based on the period of record. So the reds and oranges, you're lower than normal, your greens are normal, and then your blues and blacks are above average for that snapshot in time. So the one on the left here, this was the very end of March. You see reds and oranges. We've had 6 months of below average rainfall. And then click through here, you get a snapshot. This is just a few days ago after we had the or 4 inches of rainfall. So it's taken the edge off of the system. Levels are still low in the canal. They look kind of empty, but they still are above where they normally are this time of year. So talking about how dry it's been, talk a little bit about the drought conditions we've had. On the right is the end of March. And again, on the left is the current one here. So we've fortunately gone from the areas of extreme drought and it's taken the edge off. We're now in just severe drought conditions. Still dry out there and drier than it probably is a lot of time, but this is typical. We see this type of dryness this time of year. And in the middle, I've got, as we approach the wet season, we do expect the drought conditions to end, and we'll of course have more rain than we know what to do with. And then so I'll step through the system very quickly here. This just shows graphically the trend of the water level inside the canal. The colors align with each station. So for Golden Gate, Maine, you've got the blue and the purple lines there. And pretty much if the line is in the green area, that's kind of our median average, where you would normally see the water levels. And the blue is our operational range. So you can see the decline happening throughout the system. And I wanted to highlight on all of these, since January, there's been no discharges through any of the structures. So these recessions are all natural, groundwater movement, groundwater use, ET. It's not necessarily flood control water moving through the system. So you'll see the same pattern on all of these. The Cocohatchee, some areas have more recession than others. But again, the steepness of the curve and the steepness of that recession change depending on where you are in the system, but the pattern's still the same. And then more here at Faki Union, we're back up. You can see the rain, how it responds to the recent rainfall. It jumps back up, but some of these are a foot or more, even with just a couple inches of rainfall. So I'll highlight here the Picayune Strand operations. We haven't been pumping. It's been dry. We pretty much stopped all the pumping November, December last year, but water levels still continue to decline upstream and downstream. So the graphs on the top of the page show the recession levels of the water levels in the canals upstream of the pump stations. And you can see they're fairly normal. They're in that kind of green band for S4 for Faki Union, and for Merritt, it is a little elevated due to the recent rainfall. But the pictures on the bottom, those are from the recent helicopter flight that Paul mentioned. And you're looking downstream at the restoration area, and you can see the remnant pools left over for where the canal used to be, and how high the water level is still. It's not over the ground surface, but if there was a canal there, it would be many feet lower than it is. So you're still seeing the restoration and works there. So I want to spend a little bit of time here. This is our Corkscrew Canal, and there's been a lot of discussion about kind of the hydrology of the area at the meeting today. So I wanted to highlight a little bit of this. I showed something similar last board meeting, but the yellow boundary is kind of the overall Corkscrew, Bird Rookery, all of those areas combined. And kind of the major outlets are the purple triangles of where water can leave the system through the major canal systems. So that's kind of a zoomed out look, and then how the water flows through the area. And I wanted to zoom in on one area in particular. This is the Bird Rookery Trail, Cork 2, Cork 3 region. And so this is the structure that Lucine mentioned, Cork 2, that we just did the remote operation upgrades on. And while those operations and those upgrades are fantastic and they help us with flood control and responsiveness of the system, there's a limit to what those can do, because once there's no more excess water in the system, you still get that natural recession, even though no water's flowing through the structure itself. So what you can see on this picture, you've got your kind of wetland grade, that's that green line, and that is, you can kind of see on the left where the green blob is. That kind of shows you how the canal levels compare to the ground elevation inside the wetlands in the area. And so what I wanted to highlight was kind of the slope and the recession of the blue line. That's the water level this year at Cork 2. So no water's flowed through the structure through the gates, but you still get that recession. So hope as the initiative that Akin discussed, this will be one of the things that we would look at, is how can we change the rate of change for that slope, that recession, to keep it up higher. And not have as much groundwater flow and groundwater discharge through the system, because there's other things going on rather than just the canal operations. So speaking about groundwater, just real quickly here, just a snapshot in time of what the groundwater looks like in our particular region. And the takeaway here is, even though it's been dry, this looks better than it did last year. The graphic on the right, there were more oranges and reds last year than there were this time. So overall, while we are dry, the recent rainfall and the groundwater levels are still look pretty good for late April. So what can we expect going forward? Paul mentioned hurricane season is approaching, which comes up in the beginning of June. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the long range outlook. So we've had a 3-year La Nina event that's the temperature in a certain spot in the Pacific Ocean, and how that does have an impact on our climate here in South Florida. And so we've had that for 3 years now, and it looks like it'll transition into an El Nino event for us going through the summer and this winter. So what that means for us, why do we care what the temperature of the water is in the Pacific Ocean? So in the summer, generally that gives us less hurricane energy, less hurricane formation. That doesn't mean we won't have a hurricane. The water temperatures are still warmer than normal, but there may be less hurricane activity than we saw last year. But it only takes one storm to have an impact on us. And then for winter, that moves kind of the storm track lower in the United States. So we'll see probably, if history repeats itself, a wetter than normal dry season, and it'll be cooler than average. So what that means, our flood control operations may go on longer throughout the season than they have historically. The last 3 years have been dry, and that rainfall stopped very promptly at the end of October before. And then on looking in the short term, it's been relatively rainy for April in parts of the South Florida, and that trend will continue for the next couple of days, and then we'll get some drying after that, and some drier and more cooler seasonable temperatures. I'll close there, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your report, Brad. Any questions for Brad? Anything? Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate your report. All right, next, our monthly financial report with Candy Heater, who's joining us remotely. Candy, are you there? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, if I might, I can see that she is not unmuted at this point, so I don't know if she stepped away or what.
All right, well, we'll come back to Candy. We'll go to general public comment now. This is the opportunity that the members of the public have to speak on items that were not on the agenda.
Madam Chair, earlier today during the copper TDML or TMDL item, Ashley Jenkins was trying to comment and we had some technical issues. We're going to bring her back in now. Ashley, I see you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Board, for the opportunity to speak. For the record, my name is Ashley Jenkins and I reside in 34102. I really value the data that was introduced during that item number. As myself and Shelley McKernan have suspected, and that this was the case, we've been talking to our county, our city, and Marco Island about nutrient enrichment and the fact that if we didn't take action on harmful algae blooms, that many residents have the potential to treat their storm ponds or their bodies of water because they personally don't want to smell harmful algae. They don't want to smell red tide. They don't want to smell the effects of chlorophyll A. There are treatments that are being rendered in these storm ponds from the water intrusion that people saw during the Category 3 waste. And at large, education about blue-green water technologies. It's a company that has a time-released hydrogen peroxide treatment. And then Ecological Labs, who is currently in conversations with the Big Cypress. They have a suite of products that will help to mitigate harmful algae blooms. This is deeply concerning that this is affecting our oysters and has the potential to harm our marine and fish industries. Shelley and myself would value assisting the Big Cypress water basin to draw awareness to cost-effective solutions which do not pose harm to the environment, and looking to find solutions for excessive copper. Flow Clear is someone that I believe we've made an introduction to, but I will go ahead and include an email with you, Charlotte. and make another introduction. They have the ability to remove copper from bodies of water in storm ponds. Shelley and myself will work to make sure that introductions in the coastal neighborhoods are brought forth with these solutions. We were already in works on this call of reaching out to Pelican Bay. We will be touching base next week with your department as the local clean water advocates to strategize education and solutions with potential neighborhoods, CRAs, and HOAs. Additionally, like I said, I'll follow up with you with an email for Flow Clear.
Thank you, Ashley, and I'm glad you got a chance to circle back and to join us on that discussion item that we had, and I'll look forward to meeting with you in the near future.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that was the only speaker we had for general public comment, but I believe we've been notified that Julie Maytock will be filling in for Candy, and she's ready to give that report.
All right, we'll go ahead with Julie on our monthly financial report. Go ahead, Julie.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Basin Board members. It's Julie Maytock, the Budget Bureau Chief, and I'm standing in for Candy to brief you on the monthly financial report for the month of February. As of the end of February, your ad valorem tax collections are $10.7 million, which is a 93.2% of our budgeted amount of $11.5 million. We are currently on trend compared to last year, and we don't foresee any red flags for the remainder of this fiscal year for our ad valorem collections. Another good news point is our investment interest has, as of now, has been $55,000, which is trending better than last year due to rising interest rates and our treasurer's investment strategy. And your expenditures are on trend, with the largest being in your operations and maintenance area, which is where your field stations and capital program projects reside. Madam Chair, it concludes my report. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Julie. Vice Chair Waters, do you have any questions for Julie? Andy? No, Julie, you got off easy today. We have no questions. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, and I apologize for being tardy.
No worries. Okay, that brings us to the final board comment. Anyone have anything to share with the board?
Covered all my comments.
I have a couple of items. One is I wanted to let you know that I had the chance to celebrate Earth Day with the Community School of Naples. And this year I had the opportunity to speak with the high schoolers and some of the seniors in physics and chemistry, and it was a wonderful opportunity to talk about our mission and how we protect water resources in Collier County and throughout South Florida. So it was a great opportunity, and I really appreciated being a part of that. Also, I wanted to remind the board that next month, just for information, that the governing board of the South Florida Water Management District will be meeting in Naples, Florida. So it'll be close for us or anyone who wants to attend. That meeting is May 11th, on Thursday, May 11th, begins at 9 o'clock. And it will be held at the Conservancy Auditorium at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. So I would encourage anyone hearing the information to join us, and certainly the board members, if you would have time in your busy schedules to stop by. What's also exciting is a couple of days before our governing board meeting, the district staff who's coming this way will have the opportunity to visit Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary or take in anything that they want about some of our projects at Freedom Park, or some of the work that we've done with the expanding of the filter marsh and all the rest of the stuff we've done in Southwest Florida here with the big Cypress Basin with help from the district. So the governing board hasn't been here in probably about 7 years, 7 or 8 years, I think. So it's a big opportunity for them to see a lot of the work that this board has done over the years with our capital projects and also our water quality projects as well. So it'll be a great opportunity. And with that, I don't have anything else for anyone other than to say thank you so much for participating. I want to thank the district staff and the Basin team together for the fine support. And thank you to the board members. I know that y'all spent a lot of time with the strategic plan and all the rest of this. And I really, really appreciate all the great work that we're able to do together. So thank you so much. And with that, we're adjourned.